Resources Committee meeting for May 29th. Today we have one case. We're thinking it won't take 2 hours, but we have one case. So if the staff would like to start.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay. Oh, give me 1 second here. Okay, Z319 is a request to rezone about 3 acres from DX12 with a shop front frontage and DX12 to DX40 with a shop front frontage and conditions, and DX40 with conditions. The North Central CAC voted 5 to 10 in favor of the request, and the Planning Commission recommends approval in a vote of 6 to 1. So this is your zoning map. It shows the 4 properties for the request, currently zoned DX12 and DX12 shopfront. You can see where the difference in the frontage is kind of in this area along that line. So everything down here does not have the shopfront frontage currently, nor is it proposed in the rezoning request. This is a look just of the area. Again, you've got the properties here. Across the street is the future Devereaux Meadows Park. Got Seawar Station in red here and Cameron Village there. This is Capitol Boulevard heading into downtown. Closer look, you can see Capitol Boulevard, P Street and Glenwood. This is Harrington Street and West Street, and this is Johnson Street. Site under construction currently. As you've seen, there's a 12-story building here now. And this is site currently vacant. It's being staged for construction temporarily. You can see the beginning of the construction of Smoky Hollow Phase 2 on P Street under the bridge, looking towards the site. So the proposed conditions for the request currently prohibit a number of high-intensity and auto-oriented uses. It also provides screening and articulation for parking structures that are in that portion of the property that don't have the shop front frontage. And the way that the conditions are structured essentially mimic what is required for the rest of the property that does have the shop front frontage. There's a prohibition of EFS for siding materials. They specify permitted cladding materials as well, full cutoff light fixtures in the parking decks, and a minimum of 10,000 square feet on the ground floor for active uses. And they have defined in those conditions active uses to mean indoor recreation, personal service, restaurant or bar, and retail sales. So a minimum of 10,000 feet in the ground floor of any new building there. This table shows the difference in zoning entitlement based on the existing and proposed zoning. This is the future land use map. So this is the policy map that identifies what types of zoning should go where in the future. This dark red area is the city's central business district, which would recommend a zoning of DX, which is existing there and proposed. This is the urban form map, which provides guidance for building form, and we use the frontage tool to identify that in zoning. So again, there is a portion of the property that does not have the shop front frontage. That property, those portions of the property are along Capitol Boulevard and Johnson Street to the east and south. Other, yes, it does. And I will read what the phrasing in the comprehensive plan says to you about that. All right, so this is the urban form section. What the comprehensive plan says is the urban form map is comprised of centers and corridors and includes 2 types of designations, areas where frontage is recommended. Goes on to say that property-specific guidance has yet to be developed. There are areas that are highlighted with a transparent color, and that, I think, is getting to the gradation in the map. And it says, in these areas, frontage standards would be applied either through the rezoning petition process, which is where we are today, referencing comprehensive plan policies, or through future area plans. So again, the future land use map, the purpose it serves is to provide guidance for urban form or frontage. And what is requested in the application is the shop front frontage, which will be consistent with that guidance. Future transportation in throughout the city and in this site includes the implementation of the Wake County Transit Plans, bus rapid transit service, and this is the system-wide route corridors through the transportation plan downtown, and how the transportation plan looked at the services coming in and out of downtown. It left two alternatives for the northern service, one along West Street and one along Capitol coming into downtown. The exact alignment of that northern service for the BRT station is undecided, but it is, one is adjacent to the property in question today, and the other is just a few blocks to the west, but that decision is outstanding. Other transportation improvements to the area forthcoming are a two-way cycle track that would connect the subject property in the Glenwood district to the warehouse district. And cycle track is a buffered bicycle facility that has two-way direction on one side of the street, as it's shown in the map here.
Is that on West Street?
This alignment shows it on Harrington. Yep, so west is just right over here.
At some point, it has to get across to west, doesn't it?
So this is the
Capital.
So the two-way cycle track, is my understanding, this map is the most up-to-date that we have, and it reflects the alignment of that track all along Harrington Street, from Peace Street to
North
Davie.
across Peace. It's not going to stop at Peace. It's going to go north along west, isn't it?
I believe the extent of the cycle track is from Peace to Davie,
But in terms, so I've been in contact with the BPAC members, and they're very concerned that we have a strong connection from south of Peace to north of Peace, and it's a continuous, whether it's this kind of facility or another one. So I'm just saying, whatever the design is, needs to include a strong connection across Peace for active mobility.
right, for implementation of the cycle track. Jason Myers, Transportation, can probably speak a little closer to that.
I think the expectation is that the Devereaux Meadows Park would include a greenway trail. That would be the Pigeon House Trail, or Pigeon House Branch Greenway Trail that would connect to this facility, either at the signal at Harrington and Peace, or potentially it jogs over to west and it crosses at a signal there. So it would, from north of Peace, it's likely to be a greenway trail. South of there, it would be something more like the on-street sort of situation.
And the only point I'm making is to be sure that this zoning anticipates and contributes to that connection.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so plant facility for a cycle track in the area. And there was a pop-up event in April for a temporary cycle track. So if you were out there, you got to experience that. This is your comprehensive plan analysis. It is consistent with the future land use map and consistent with the plan overall, including the urban form map. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Could you go back to that slide about the current zoning versus requested zoning side-by-side comparison?
Yes.
Yeah. If you could just leave it there for a second.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Retail steps staying the same.
Sorry.
Gross retail staying the same. 272.
If I could, Ms. Crowder, so the gross retail area you commented stayed the same. I think the assumption is that it
10,000.
would just be on the first floor, right?
And they're just, I think they designated 10,000, is that what they?
Minimum of 10,000. But if they did a development that the entire ground floor was retail, staff's best assumption is that the most they could probably get there was 72,000.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
But
And
I
that-
just read
let me
only
just
10.
Make sure I understand that. And you're talking about retail that's a wrap, not the entire floor plate.
Right, so what this analysis shows here is we use a tool called Envision Tomorrow, wherein we put in all of the modeled requirements of what the code requires for development. It's a spreadsheet that spits out the entitlement to our best estimation, and this is what it came with. And this assumption of a single retail use would be likely not a wrap structure.
So, as far as you know, does the project have free frontages with direct public access? Obviously, the Capitol Boulevard side does not.
Yep, let me just look at here you go. All right, so this is, you can kind of see the shape of the Harrington Street extension taking place here. This is Johnson Street here, and this is West, and this is Peace. So yeah, you've got Peace Street, Harrington, and Johnson. And then of course Capitol, and then Johnson is kind of the motion to exit Capitol to get down to Peace Street.
So I have a question in terms of, and I'm not sure if this is the right place to ask it or not, but if we're talking about potentially 40 stories, what's the impact of that on things like our fire department? Do they have the right kind of equipment and that sort of thing?
I don't have the answer to that question of what their equipment or capacity is to service that. I can bring back more information for you.
Yeah.
Or for the council, sure.
Any other questions for staff?
Sure. Obviously, this is a highly congested part of the city. Train tracks and Capitol really limit opportunities for east-west trips. And obviously, I'm concerned about the aggregate trip generation here. Obviously, we're hoping that the BRT going north will help north-south trips, but I'm more concerned about the limited opportunities for east-west trips here, again, with those barriers. And I'm wondering if staff has done an analysis of either the trip impacts of this project or in the aggregate of all these projects that are coming along on the capacity on Peace Street for east-west trips.
So if you remember back to the table we looked at about the entitlement earlier, one of the key reasons that we generate that entitlement with the envision analysis is for our transportation staff to look at the anticipated trip generation for a project like this and all the projects that we look at. So on page 19 of the staff report, there is a table that includes the anticipated trip volume change here.
And does it give level of service at signalized intersections?
Right, so that type of analysis would be provided specifically to connectivity directionally or at intersections would be done through a TIA, which has not been conducted for this project. But so that level of analysis has not been done.
Okay. But it could be done but it would have to be the applicant offering it.
So TIAs are triggered in a number of ways, a traffic impact analysis. One of them is through zoning. If an entitlement for trips crosses a threshold, the code, the UDO says we should require a TIA. There are exceptions made in DX or downtown mixed-use zoning districts, and there are exceptions made for other factors as well. Adversely, Planning Commission, City Council can also request that those analyses be done, and that's written in the code as well. But the practice is in DX, which the zoning is, there is not a TIA conducted or required through a certain trip threshold.
So when you say council could request, what does that really mean? If a majority said we'd like to see one, then it would be required by the applicant to provide one, or the city would provide one?
Perhaps transportation can help. I'm not sure exactly how mechanically it has worked in the past. The code says that Planning Commission and City Council can request that work to be done.
Who does it and who pays for it?
Right, that's a great question. It is not specific in the code who does that work. I would imagine.
I believe it's on the applicant.
I was trying to pull up the exact section of either the UDO or the street design manual that says this, but my recollection is that there's a number of triggers where a TIA is required. One of those triggers is at the request of Planning Commission or City Council. So my understanding is that that would be a request that would be made of City Council of the applicant, and then we would review it to our normal procedures as if it were triggered without any action by planning commission or city council, which happens frequently, and that would be up to your discretion to do that.
Is that something that request would not be formally made until the full council requested it, or could this committee request it?
I'd refer that question to the city attorney. I don't know who can take that action.
Well, it might be a good idea to ask the applicant if they'd be willing to voluntarily do it, and that would sort of answer the question, I think, as opposed to whether you're, imposing it on the applicant or not. So I think if the answer is sure, we'll do that, then you don't have that question.
So why don't we hold that question until we have the applicant up? Thank you.
If not, probably council would have to make a decision about whether they could approve the request without that information, because they wouldn't be able to decide what the traffic impact was.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you.
So, let me see if I have any more staff questions. I'll wait. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the applicant?
Can I get some help with, sure. Thank you. Sorry.
Good afternoon, Bonner.
Good afternoon. It's good to be back. It's been a while since I've been to a committee meeting, especially GNR.
Yes.
It used to be, I think you were Axl Rose.
Uh-huh.
I might have
Yes,
slacked,
at least
but
you're, that's right.
that's the way it went. But, yeah, so I honestly appreciate y'all's time, and I know that y'all spend such an incredible amount of time on this, as I used to be on this committee as well, and sincerely thank you for the work you're doing for our community. And I mean, I think y'all know this, that our city is growing, and it has been growing for the last 120 years. If you look at the population data, we've been doubling every 20 years, and that seems to be continuing. There's no sign of that abating. And so that means when I'm 61, we're going to be 900,000 people in the city of Raleigh. And we've got to figure out where we're going to put those people. And we got to figure out how we're going to grow and what are the principles we're going to apply when we do grow. And so what y'all, what the decision here is this reasonable, and is it in the public interest in this way to grow and decide what that future is going to look like? And the way y'all do it, and I used to do it, is through planning and through citizen engagement. Those are the big ways to implement, to determine whether we're on the right path. And so what are the plans that we've set, and then what's the population saying about it? And so from a planning perspective, this is consistent with the comp plan and all policies that are relevant to this site. It's consistent with the growth framework map. It's consistent with the urban form map, and it's consistent with the future land use map. It's also consistent with the downtown plan. So every planning effort that this council and councils before it had entered into, this plan is consistent. In terms of citizen engagement, we reached out to the 500-foot neighbors. There weren't many. I think there was one person who showed up to that meeting because there really aren't any neighbors within 500 feet of this project. The West Street is further than that. And we then reached out to the Glenwood South Neighborhood Coalition and have had several meetings with them above and beyond what's required by code or expected. We then went to 2 CAC meetings and got a positive vote from the CAC. We went to 2 Planning Commission meetings and got a 6-1 vote from the Planning Commission. So from a planning perspective and a citizen engagement perspective, this is a project that should move forward. And we believe it's a project to move forward because we think it can provide an urban gateway for the northern side of our downtown. We have 2 previous developments that I'll go through quickly that we've entered into, and we feel like we didn't need a rezoning because it wasn't a gateway project that was significant and needed the kind of gravitas that we feel this project provides. If you can see, this is the site here on Harrington, Capitol, Johnson, Harrington, and Peace. And, oh, that ain't working. And this is the first project that's underway. forgive the way it looks right now. The sausage is being made, but it's going to be a beautiful project. And we did not need to go in for rezoning on this project. The second project is the Smoky Hollow Phase 2, and we didn't need to go into rezoning on this either. We didn't feel like it was the right context for the area. In our current site, we've added conditions that we know that the council is concerned about. We've added some of the typical use restrictions that have often been employed in the downtown. We've required that we screen the parking consistent with the shop front frontage along all frontages which aren't along Capitol and that corner, so that Peace and Johnson, and Harrington will have that good look, and it comes around that corner on Johnson too, but not that section there where it's at Capitol, because nobody wants to live looking right at Capitol. And if we did true shop front frontage, that basically requires putting retail and restaurants in the first level, and that just doesn't make any sense. I mean, it would look way out of place. We added restrictions against EFS. We added a lot of the aesthetic conditions that were negotiated with the Dillon development. We applied directly to this development to ensure high quality materials. We added limitations to our lighting restrictions to make sure that full cutoff fixtures were used and there weren't light coming out obliquely in his parking decks and causing aesthetic issues. So we really truly want this building to be an aesthetic contribution to our city, and something that we all can be proud of, and something that as we work here for the next 40 years that we'll continue to be proud of way far into the future. So we heard those aesthetic concerns, and we addressed those concerns. We've also heard concerns about traffic. I think a good analog for this building is the PNC building downtown. It's essentially the exact same building that we're planning, with parking under office, under residential, and I think we all recognize that the PNC building did not break our downtown and did not make it a traffic nightmare. I would also add this building and this site have Capitol Boulevard, which people can jump in and jump out, which is a much more heavily traveled thoroughfare and can transfer a lot more people than any of the buildings around the PNC building currently. So we've looked at the traffic, and we've considered a TIA, which their TIAs are really intended to say, how do we get people through this area faster? Is it slowing people down because we need people to move? It's a suburban concept to have a TIA and say, how do we get people to move their cars faster? Whereas in the downtown, the opposite is our goal. We want to make a place that's sustainable for people, that's attractive for pedestrians, cyclists, people who are using new forms of transportation like our new bike share. And so how are they going to use those if we're just trying to jam as many cars through there as fast as possible? And that's ultimately the goal of a TIA. We also have heard concerns about air, light, and privacy. This site, as I mentioned before, doesn't have any neighbors. And the shadows will be cast north towards Devereaux Meadows Park, which can actually provide some nice relief in a 95-degree day like today. So we don't feel like those air, light, and privacy, we haven't heard those from citizens, we didn't hear from the Planning Commission or CAC, and we feel like those are greatly mitigated on this site. And lastly, we have heard concerns about affordable housing, and we take that very seriously, and we want to help become part of the solution, and we're continuing to evaluate ways that we can become part of that solution, and would want to address that more specifically at a later date. One other component that we've heard about is how our transportation system that we built and that we are building is going to be successful in the future. And y'all all know that transit can't be successful without density and without going into areas and adding a significant number of riders, because transit is all judged, its success or its failure is determined by ridership. In order to generate ridership, there need to be riders immediately adjacent to that transit. This site provides that. Within a block or two, the BRT will likely be coming through. We've got Cycle Track, we've got Devereaux Meadows Park, we've got the Pigeon House Branch Creek Greenway extension. And so I genuinely feel like if we're going to do a signature building in the city, that this is the location that it should go. And this is an opportunity for us to do something special and provide a bracketed gateway to the northern edge of our downtown. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions for the applicant?
Yeah, I have a couple. So Bonner, where would the main entrance be for this?
We would need to nail that down at site plan, but what's been discussed is Johnson and Harrington. Yeah, this is TJ Behringer. Oh, and I forgot to introduce myself. Bonner Gaylord, representing Kane Realty and Williams Building and Realty.
Yeah, and TJ Behringer with Kane Realty, also representing Kane and Williams. Again, thanks for having us also. So the access that we're talking about for the site likely would end up having not any access off Capitol, maybe an in and out off of Johnson, probably a little bit further down than I just drew it. Probably an entrance, maybe across from where the entrance is to the Publix grocery store there. And then probably service or other access onto Peace kind of right over there. But that will be handled in site plan, and the zoning, we're not asking for any variances from typical access DOT rules or Raleigh or state DOT rules. So we'll handle all that, according to the normal traffic rules.
Okay. And so with a building of this magnitude, we know there's going to be lots of levels of parking. Can you kind of talk a little bit about screening of that?
Here, let's go to the
So here's again, just conceptual rendering, and really we have not gotten fully into the design of the building because we haven't known what the rules for design are yet. But this is kind of massing it according to the code and a 40-story building, kind of how it would look, how we're thinking of the uses. So as you can see, there's a, relatively, most of the block is taken up with a podium, which is a lot of parking, and then residential outside of that. So as you look into the urban streets, not Capitol, it will likely, be mainly residential that's faced out that way. And then the code has provisions about which go through, I believe, the shopfront zoning, the shopfront frontage in a mixed-use building is required, but the requirement is vertical and horizontal articulation and a certain amount of screening and that type of thing. And then we applied that same rule to the Capitol Boulevard frontage. The only thing we stripped off when we were talking about not doing shopfront is the first floor, because that's actually about 20 feet below Capitol, and so you don't need shops down there. But so the deck would be either screened with, screening material, or it would be have residential units in front of it, or I guess it could be office units.
So basically, this rendering, we're saying that large platform at the bottom is basically parking.
surrounded by
Parking and residential.
Some
yeah,
residential.
and what you see down here, we did 10,000 because it's a number we know we can hit, but we would fully expect to do more than 10,000 square feet. And that's all along, you can tell the darker coloration along the base. That's what that indicates, with residential above wrapping the parking.
We all do good retail, and I thought 10,000 sounded a little small.
Yeah, I mean, we would do more. We just wanted to
We just
make a
put
commitment.
something.
Yeah, we just put something on there.
That's your minimum then.
And so that,
Yeah.
for the rest of the blocks, how do you go backwards on that? So for the rest of the blocks, on this block, it's a 46,000 foot grocery store. And then on this,
3,000 additional.
and 3,000, so 49. And then on this block, there's a total of about 45 or 50,000 feet of more kind of like shops and local space that weren't able to fit in there with the grocery store. So we would try to activate, especially Harrington, some of Peace, and some of Johnson, with retail, access to the office above and the residential above and those type of uses.
So it'd be lobby for the residential, lobby for the retail, parking deck entrances, service area, and then we would intend to make everything else restaurant and retail. Y'all probably know we're a company that's founded in retail, and we believe that the retail experience is what really drives the walkability and the placemaking, and so we would maximize that. We just had heard from the Planning Commission a concern about that, and so we wanted to give some degree of comfort that we weren't going to come in and make it all parking.
Other questions?
So I appreciate your comment about TIAs. They are in some respects a vestige from our auto-dependent days. That's actually the reason why, when we were writing the UDO, I asked staff to rewrite the section on infrastructure sufficiency to take into account multimodal TIAs. But in this particular project, the one comment I get more than any other, and I don't know any other way to answer it except through a TIA, is to say, as I look at the numbers here, 519 PM peak trips, a little bit less than the AM peak. How long could a citizen of Raleigh expect to sit in traffic at a light or waiting for multiple signals to get through that signal in front of your project on P Street?
Yeah, and there's that, and I don't have that in front of me. It's 519 PM peak trips.
So that's proposed zoning maximums that staff put together.
Yeah. Well, I've got a few different answers to that. One, the site is currently completely under construction, as y'all know, and the way that TIAs are done are measuring today. It goes out in the field. It'll take 4 months for us to complete the study in a construction zone that's constantly changing, that we've learned 3 things about this site. One, these intersections are temporary lights. So what they do is they don't have any detection. They don't know when a car's there. They just rotate on a timer. And that causes significant backups because it's set to an average. And so at peak times, it's not flowing cars through there appropriately. Second, this Johnson Street extension is not built. We're in the process of helping the city build it with our phase 1 and 2 developments. But that will provide a brand new east-west connection through our downtown, and that won't be complete. One other that's a little bit further on the horizon, y'all probably have heard that the county is now looking at issuing an RFP. They've actually been saying they're going to come out with it here for the past several months. They've been saying very soon, hadn't come out yet, but they're looking at selling this site. When this site redevelops, there'll be a new east-west connection to come through there. So essentially a TIA would be looking at a condition that's not reality, and it wouldn't give us the information that we would really need to know about what this site, it can't project for roads that aren't there and stoplights that don't work. And so there's not a way to get good information on that. Another way I would look at that is there are some other sites across the city that have generated, I was hearing about one that was 13,000 trips PM peak. Michael, will you tell me about that, a project? I mean, anyway, there's other projects that you can look at that have humongous traffic impacts and look at the way that they're applied and what they're able to, they still function. And then I would turn back to the PNC analogy and how that has not broken the transportation network or even nearly broken it. It's a significant contribution to our downtown.
And one thing that I would also add is that, I think the city and then our project and the state have invested there are future projects to go on here, but the current projects that are going on, there's tens of millions of dollars being spent on Capitol Boulevard right now. There is millions of dollars that are going to be spent on the park and connecting the Greenway there to move people through into and through the downtown. We're spending a lot of money on road improvements in the private side on Johnson Street improvement and some of the utility work that we're doing along there and duck bank work and things like that. And the city is spending a lot of money in conjunction with the DOT on some of the Harrington and Peace work. And so this, I should probably erase it, it's getting too much, but this grid that has been created with Johnson and Harrington, the not too long ago history was it just went like that. And Johnson didn't go through, and that connected, but the road, it didn't follow through there. Johnson hit here, you went around to there and went down. So the city, it's been a full public, the state, city, and private sector have invested a ton of money in this area, and that's where we feel like there's a lot of benefits that now we can do to
So I
help
appreciate
our
that.
transit
And in fact, in that regard, could you point out the transportation infrastructure improvements you have or will be making in connection with this project?
Yes, I mean, we will be the overall project, or are you saying this particular one?
Just like where we're helping build
Let's just
Johnson
stick with
Street.
this rezoning for right now, because if we start getting into the project, we'll get, just, what are the infrastructure improvements, mobility infrastructure improvements that this project is funding?
So this project, the off-site improvements will be determined during site plan and the
Oh, that's a
requirements.
question
and
for
that type of-
staff, huh?
So yeah, question for staff. I would say we didn't go through a zoning on these other two projects, and there's a significant amount of off-site improvement that they've been doing. So we've seen it more handled in that side of it, but it'll be making sure we design it to the bike, the cycle track, and continuing to connect things through there. And
And then the fees for impact fees as well.
thoroughfare fees and those.
Yeah.
I guess it just seems like, just for you to have a good handle on your pro forma, you'd probably have a fairly good idea of what's going to be required for you to fund in terms of
In terms
mobility
of
infrastructure.
fees.
Just,
Mobility.
new roads, new signals, new bike lanes, new sidewalks, all those mobility infrastructure improvements.
Yes, we do expect to pay improvements through that. I mean, I don't have it right at my fingertips, but we're not asking for any variances on any of that.
And we'd be happy to entertain if there's standards above and beyond what is currently required
Right, I'm
by
just-
code and
No,
staff.
I
We'd be
just
happy to entertain
wanted
that.
to give you full credit for all the mobility infrastructure improvements you're making in a tight situation here. So maybe that's a question for staff.
Yeah, absolutely, and I do appreciate that. And I will say on another area that we weren't required to do it, I mean, as you look at the second phase of the Smoky Hollow development, in this block, the most dense way to develop this one, to Bonner's point about trying to placemake and trying to really create a place where people are staying there and not just passing through, and that adds to the community and the fabric of everything in downtown, the most dense way to develop this site would have been to push the office building up against the parking deck next to the west condo, so right there, and then build a loop of residential and kind of grab most of the common space for the residents of that project. Instead, we designed a pedestrian way through here, and then this blue line, which is the blue line that's already on there, is a driveway but private access into the deck, and all of that is going to be public all the time and open, and we're spending a tremendous amount of money, millions of dollars, on making that public, both pedestrian and vehicular passageways. That's an extension to Tucker Street, and so continuing that and adding to the free flow of people through the area.
Yeah, and I think we can. Yeah, and this is a rendering of that shows some of the permeability and the through-site access that we're providing. So there essentially will be vehicular access east-west, as well as pedestrian access east-west, and then pedestrian access north-south, bike and pedestrian access. So we've taken what could have been a very large block, and because of the context and the roadway networks around this site, broken it into 3 pieces to create that permeability. And y'all see it all the time. Other developers don't do that. They claim that all as a big pool courtyard, and public be damned. So we've tried to make our private investments public investments as well.
Okay. Let me just say that obviously this is an area that was identified in the downtown plan, as you mentioned, as one of the catalytic areas. And so the city does have a strong interest in redeveloping this area in an urban form. And clearly West Street is going to be someday, or Capitol, will be the BRT corridor, and it'll be a huge mobility asset to get people out of their cars. East-west is still very constrained. So as I look at the downtown plan and the catalytic project for this area, and I just pick out several items, and you said it's consistent. So the downtown plan says there will be an emphasis on creating authentic experiences, focusing on inclusion so that downtown benefits everyone, not just a few. Opportunities, there'll be opportunities for households of varied ages and incomes. So how do you plan to be in compliance with that?
Well, I think in terms of the overall plan, it's addressing all of the downtown, not that every project would satisfy all components and all, and be all things to everything. And I think there's also that conversation between the difference of equity and equality. And I think equity means equal access, equality means everybody's equal, and I think we all recognize that that's an unattainable goal. I also think that in terms of the housing affordability, we'd like to think through and have discussions at a future date on some alternate ways to potentially solve and actually answer that question very directly.
All right. And I guess we already talked about implementation, funding and financing the improvements that are necessary, and we'll get staff's take on what's going to be involved there. One of the main elements that shows up in this concept plan is a high-quality public civic realm as a plaza space. It talks about a central plaza. Can you tell me how your development here is going to be consistent with that element of the downtown plan?
In terms of a central plaza of the, well, we don't have we had room, there's a significant central plaza over here. This site has more off-site improvements to allow for sort of access to the publics. We don't have this design yet. We, at the Dillon, as you know, we're not required to do any of what we did in terms of a plaza. We went to the ninth floor and we built space that did not satisfy our open space requirements and was outside of those regulations. So we don't have it designed to where I could show you a picture of a plaza, but we certainly would want to make this building as publicly as accessible as possible. There's going to be publicly accessible retail, restaurants, and services, publicly accessible office, and guests will be coming and going to residences' homes. So we don't have I don't have anything that I can show you today, but I can tell you that it's certainly within our ethos and within the way that we develop to work to be able to build those facilities. And
we're not asking for any variances on open space or requirements or anything like that.
Yeah, all in accordance with the plans.
Okay, so you're not in the position to condition beyond code minimums for open space in accordance with the downtown plan.
Well, what would be a condition that you're considering?
Well,
I mean, we certainly want
something beyond the minimum.
And because some of the minimums don't help get open space in that they, for example, the enclosed pools that we avoided count, and what we did at the Dillon does not. And so I can't exactly say that we'll do more open space because sometimes the city's code doesn't really apply open space the way that it should because it's not open to the public. If you're looking for publicly accessible space, if we could probably talk through, and think about a condition with respect to publicly accessible open space as a condition sort of crafted for a more multi-tiered development like this would be.
Great. I would appreciate that.
Okay.
That's some of the work that can be done as we move forward with the conditions for the case.
Yes.
Mr. Cox.
Just one question. I was looking at the trips generated to follow up on Councilor Stevenson's comments. It says that it notes that the percent of AM trips in the peak direction is 89% and the percent of PM trips in the peak direction is 84%. I was wondering what the peak direction is.
I don't even know. That would be a Vision Tomorrow question.
Staff.
Yeah, he's looking at it.
What is the peak direction?
So is that a staff question? So,
Sounds like they did the analysis, so I guess that would be their question.
The peak direction is not in reference to north, south, east, west direction. It's in reference to in or out of the site. I believe that given that it's residential, it's going to be out in the AM, in the PM. but I could look and give you a more definitive answer, but that's what we mean by peak direction.
It's residential, but it's also office and some
Right.
retail.
Yeah, so it could be that I was wrong about that in and out, but it is a function of into or out of the site, not in a cardinal direction.
Okay, are most of the trips generated by the office component then, rather than the residential?
I could answer that question by looking through this a little bit more.
Okay, because the concern that I have is, particularly with Capitol Boulevard, I know that because I drive through there every day, and getting to Wade Avenue is very difficult these days. Now, maybe that'll improve somewhat when the road is finished, but I'm curious to know what the impact will be on Capitol Boulevard in the AM and PM.
I mean, I know what NCDOT has a biannual survey of traffic counts, and I know what those numbers are. How that's been impacted by the construction is not something I have any information on.
Yeah, I'd like to get that information because it does look like under the proposed zoning maximums, we would be looking at almost 5,000 trips a day that are not there today. And so my experience with the traffic is what's there today. And so, you know, what would an additional 5,000 trips a day, if most of those are going on Capitol to and from because of the office component, I'd be curious to know what the impact is.
Jason, is that something that you could get?
Yes, I mean, to answer the detailed question of what does that mean for the system, that's not something I can answer while we're here.
Right.
Something staff can do some analysis on. In terms of what is the in or out peak direction of that trip, that's something I can get in the next 15 minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
More questions for the applicant?
So I know with this rezoning, you could go up to 40, and I know it's in the early stages of planning, but so are y'all thinking more closer to 40 or 30, or kind of whereabouts are you?
Well, we feel genuinely that the opportunity to do a signature building partly comes down to how slender and vertical you can make it. I mean, we all know the buildings that we like and the buildings we don't like, and usually the ones that end up on the cover of architectural magazines are ones that have that sort of slender reaching for the sky. It also benefits from an air, light, and privacy perspective. If the concerns are about height and the light that blocks, I would suggest that the surrounding neighborhoods would perhaps even benefit from that, particularly Devereaux Meadows Park. If the concern is about raw density, I would say that the Vision Tomorrow is a computer program. We would not build nearly the density that has been spit out by the maximums that would be allowed on the site. We wouldn't build typically over 400 residential units. There's market reasons for that. There's a reason that we see about 400 for all residential projects is a maximum, because in a lease up, if you go into a second cycle of lease up, it can really kill your development. And so you want to be able to lease it up within a certain time frame, and usually that's conducive to about 400 maximum. We've done between 220 and 400 is sort of our bracketed range. And so I think what's listed in the Vision Tomorrow of 660 or something like that is far outside of what we would expect to do. Additionally, the office is more than what we've done. I don't know the last time a building was built in Raleigh over 300,000 square feet, but it's been 30 plus years. And so
Downtown has been kind of 200 to 220. We've been pretty active in that market.
yeah, so
So part of it's what the market will bear.
yes, and we don't, and so in terms of the true density, I don't think that the Vision Tomorrow numbers reflect our intent. In terms of the height, we feel like the height gets a attractive structure that never would be bigger or taller from a elevation standpoint than the buildings on Fayetteville Street, because it's a 60-some foot difference in base elevation, and our current restrictions are lower than what is currently built on Fayetteville Street. So, under no condition would this be the tallest building in the city, And we also feel like it would at the same time create that signature gateway component to the downtown.
So you don't know how tall you're going to build it?
We would aim for 40.
And the massing that's shown here kind of shows you how it would stack up, that you'd end up having a floor of retail, about 8 to 10 stories of parking, so call it total of 10 there, something 8 to 13 stories of office, and then 20-ish stories of residential, and that all, depending on how that all works out, that's what creates a taller building. That's kind of what you see at PNC. And this was something that the Planning Commission liked about it, was that it was one building, more slender, with, stepped up to it and all that sort of thing. You can get the same densities from a traffic concern in that standpoint. With 20-story buildings, you could do 2 of them, but they'd be a lot closer to each other. The building would feel a little more stubbier. It'd be like if we did the Dillon building and then the next block over had been 20 stories also. So to us, 40 stories has a big number. It's on, it sounds taller, but it's not really that much more density than you're really seeing go around downtown otherwise.
Yeah, and I'd also say that we'll probably be more limited by the height restriction than the number of stories. So the height restriction will be our limiting factor. We don't know yet, again, because we haven't designed the building, exactly how many. I mean, it'll take us a year and a half and several $1 million to actually design the building. But at that point in time, we're pretty sure that the answer will be it's a little lower than 40, but we don't know whether it's 38 or what that number might be. And so it'd be hard for us to put that forward today because we just haven't designed it.
And then, you speak about the timing of it. I think that's also important as we're thinking about traffic, and BRT is not going to be there tomorrow, but it is going to be there. What is it? The current discussion is 2026 or 2027. And you think about this project, and from, if we are to get approved and rezoned, then it's probably a year and a half to go through site plan and permitting process, and then it's probably about 2.5 years to build this project, and then it's going to be about a year to lease it up. So you're talking about 5 years out in a good case, could be longer than that if economic cycles and stuff like that. It starts actually timing out pretty well with our transit investments, that type of thing.
Any other questions for the applicant?
I'm just kind of curious. I'll just throw out some curiosity questions that have really no bearing probably on the rezoning, but obviously with this and all the other construction that's going on down there, do you anticipate having any kind of private shuttle system to take people to North Hills?
He's throwing
Are you offering a public system? Because I think we would be interested. The answer would be yes to that. Actually, interestingly enough, we're should have an announcement soon about a privately funded, publicly available transportation system at North Hills here soon. So yeah, I didn't. Shh.
We promise we won't tell anybody.
Yeah. Thank you, Kay.
Yeah, but I believe I've heard somewhere that there's actually a large number of people that live downtown that work in North Hills.
And we've seen vice versa. I mean, some folks want both environments, and I loved working down here because having North Hills and downtown being my stomping grounds was perfect. I mean, it's a wonderful place to be. Both places have amazing amenities and opportunities, and so we've seen both happen. That people work at North Hills, live downtown, live at North Hills, work downtown, and then some people will live at North Hills and then live at downtown and then move back to North Hills, and so there's a but in reality, the urban places and the more vertically integrated, walkable, mixed-use environments are the way our city needs to grow, and for people to recognize that, it's a good thing.
Okay, I think there's some questions.
First of all, I'm going to follow up on that, and I want to just mention that Bonner and I actually went to the Wake County planning staff and commissioners during the work on the Wake County Transit Plan to try to get the BRT line to run up to Midtown. And that of course, it's going up Capitol now, but there may yet be a later phase where we'll provide that high-quality transit service.
Yeah, and we want to be part of the solution. We also don't want to get in the way of how fast things move. And so we want to be a part of whatever solution that that you all and other publicly elected officials decide is the right way to go. And we want to, yoke up and pull in the same direction.
So just a couple more comments. First of all, I appreciate that you're going to have some conversations about a condition related to publicly accessible space, whether it complies with the city standard or not. I really appreciate that. After I talked to staff about what a high-quality active mobility crossing across P Street looks like, I might want to say, is there some way you can assist in that as well? Okay. Active uses on the ground floor. I think that you just talked about the various plates, and I think you said first floor would be retail. Is that what I heard?
Retail, restaurants, and then the service and
It'd be a
access.
bunch of different uses, but that's where the retail.
So it'd be parking in and out, it'd be service areas, it'd be the
Access
lobby of the residential, lobby of the office,
So,
and then
so
the
obviously,
balance would be.
So I appreciate that, and yes, I guess there are some service requirements there, but I'd be interested in a condition that says once you've cleared the service requirements frontage on the ground level, where there's a sidewalk, not Capitol Boulevard, that you would be able to commit to active uses and retail or otherwise.
And I think
And that's in shop front.
yeah, the shop front is pretty strict on that. In fact, as active as Dillon is, it was, I don't know that we were able to meet all the requirements of the shop front frontage because I don't think the shop front frontage originally anticipated the service uses that are required in a building in order to keep the trash cans off the sidewalk. Because, I mean, y'all see in other parts of the city where the trash cans are littered in the sidewalk, that's because they don't have the service. And so, but
We're very much on the same page, and if there's something we need to clarify in the conditions,
And so,
happy to do that.
so the last item comes back to transportation and trip impacts, and it sounds like I need to turn to staff to get some sense of the number one concern that I hear from people in the vicinity of this project, and that is, am I going to be able to use P Street at all during the peak hours, or is it just going to be shut down from congestion? And of course, it'd be great if we had transit going east-west on P Street. And I've talked to staff about how we can make that happen. It's not in the books right now, but in the meantime, again, that is people's big concern. I think people appreciate that Capitol Boulevard has a lot of capacity on it. They understand that transit along West Street in the future is going to be a great alternative for moving north-south. But again, it's those east-west trips that are really constrained, and they're at the peak hour today, it's kind of a headache. Some people call it a nightmare. And so I just want to get some estimate of how this project and perhaps the other ones you have in the pipeline are going to, with the street improvements you're talking about, how they're going to be able to be diverted off of Peace so that it, again, doesn't get P Street to the position where in the peak hours it's just unusable.
Yeah, and I'd say a couple of things about that. I definitely think traffic can give better answers than we can. We're not traffic engineers, and the staff knows significantly more about these corridors, their current pressures, and how this would have an impact. Obviously, the road network is not built out. The signals are not working the way they should since they're temporary signals. So I think people's current experience is not commensurate with their future experience. It's like that, the Capitol Boulevard going north that Councilor Cox mentioned earlier, the on-ramp there is, I don't know why there's not an accident there every few minutes, because it's basically you've got no time to merge, and then you got to kind of jump off after the gas station where people are slowly pulling in, and it's kind of a mess over there. So unfortunately, the current construction conditions would preclude us from doing any sort of TIA that would give you any information that would be helpful because of those lack of infrastructure. But I also think that from a policy standpoint, the council's current approach, which is appropriate, is to not look at the downtown traffic, since traffic and velocity is not the objective in the downtown. And if we use traffic to stop the opportunities for density, that's just going to push it out to the suburbs, which gets us worse traffic. You know, for example, the staff and Ken Bowers has a video on YouTube talking about North Hills and how North Hills produces 50% of the traffic of a comparable suburban development. And that comes with density. Density allows for retail to be successful and restaurants to be successful, and that creates walkable places. And without that, people move to other communities, and then they drive in. So I think this is a better solution for our community, and I hope you all will agree.
So I think there's some, thank you.
Certainly.
Stay close in case there's more questions. But
Okay.
So if we could, Jason, come on up, both of you, to address a couple of things you thought you could find quickly.
So the question was the peak direction. So I went and looked at the table of those 467 AM trips. That is generated by the scenario where it was just office. So taking the envision analysis of what was possible if you built an office-only project that generates 467 AM peak trips, of which 401 of those are in an inbound direction and 65 are in an outbound. The other scenarios would have generated less total trips and would conceivably have a more balanced in and out scenario. In the PM, the 518 is generated by an office and retail scenario in which it's mostly out, 419 out, 99 in. There's a off by one in there because of the way that everything rounds. If there's retail, if we look at a scenario where there's residential in there, conceivably that reduces the number of square foot of office in the envision analysis, and that would balance that a little bit. It would also generally in traffic engineering procedures allow for us to assume more internal trips or people walking, their trip is actually to take the elevator down, maybe go over to the next building because they live and work in the same place. In this scenario, there isn't a lot of that assumed. It's assumed for all this analysis in a very conservative way the current condition of the current transit and the current environment around there, and only assume 5% reduction in the trips from IT suburban practices for things like walking and biking, because there isn't BRT there now and there aren't great bike facilities there now. In the long-term plans, we implement our plans, we would look at that differently, but we're analyzing that in kind of a current operations if we drop this project in there as it is today. Does that answer the main question?
My biggest question then is what the impact would be on Capitol Boulevard.
So, and
Particularly
that's
if there are suburban people coming from the suburbs to work in this office building and then going home at night.
Yeah. In a scenario, we could answer a little bit in terms of how many trips there are in a peak hour on Capitol Boulevard, what the percentage change of that would be if they were all driving on Capitol. That's something we can provide. Whether we can get you a level of service, I'd have to refer to my traffic engineering colleague to get a little bit better professional engineer perspective on that.
So my comment about Capitol Boulevard and the PM peak, if that's where the trip concerns are, that's the most complicated maneuver, getting off of this site and having to dogleg from P Street to head north on Capitol Boulevard, right?
And Matt, can you help me pull up a map? I want to make sure I understand his question.
Sat down too soon.
You said the PM were outbound trips.
Yeah, PM peak.
And so if they're going to be heading north, the only way to get north on Capitol is to get onto P Street, right? First.
It's the shortest way. It's not the only way.
Okay.
There is, so it's my understanding that they do not, and depending on, there is no property right to have access on any of this frontage kind of along here because NCDOT has control of access there from at least a vehicle standpoint. So assuming a driveway.
Still be southbound trips.
Here, there's two ways to get onto Capitol. One is to go take a right and then on the new ramp in that direction. Right. The other way is to take a left here to go down Harrington to, I don't remember which one's one way in that direction. It'd be Jones, and then take a left onto Dawson and kind of come back up in this direction. Both of those get you to Capitol.
Heading north.
Right, heading north.
But the one where you start off heading south, that puts you through a couple signalized intersections, which in the PM peak already, those streets are already going to be full. And so this is kind of gets back to the point I'm trying to make, whether you're just using Peace to go east-west or using Peace to get on the Capitol northbound in the PM peak. There's just, it's a very constrained network right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my concern too, is actually Peace Street.
Well, I drive on Capitol, so
Well, if you're coming out of this project, we're going to take one of these two routes to get there.
Do we have our transportation questions answered, or is there additional information that you are requesting?
Well, I am interested in an estimate of what the east-west delay on Peace Street in the AM and PM peak will be. And again, I know you're saying it's based on actual traffic counts, but obviously there are other techniques for estimating trips and estimating future network improvements that could help say this percentage will probably go this way and this percentage will probably go that way. But at the end of the day, it looks like it's going to be a real challenge.
I believe staff is committed, absent a TIA, with the available data sets and making some reasonable assumptions based on the information that's not going to be perfect and won't reflect information that will be known eventually through a site plan. We'll try to do what we can with some reasonable assumptions that might give some estimates.
So
Well,
if we,
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Will that also take into account, I believe there are some other requests for pretty intense development in that area. Will that be taken into account as well?
We
don't know
in
what those
terms
are.
of being able to prepare something, I think you'll have this at your meeting 2 weeks from now. So I think we'll have to rely on data that we can find that's available today. I know we did a similar presentation that I think you're suggesting in the warehouse district. That took quite a bit of time to be able to pull that together. I think that would be hard to commit to within the next 2 weeks.
well,
So
there
what-
is another rezoning coming, isn't there, across the street for another 40 stories?
So I think
I
In-
mean, if that's coming, then
in terms.
I'd like to be able to consider that, the impact of both of those at the
In
same
terms
time.
of this zoning case, I think what we've asked staff to do, they could bring back to us at the June 12th meeting. We need to set the public hearing for this by July 2nd. That's the clock. So if that gives you a couple of weeks, could you bring back some information as requested by the committee?
Yeah, I think we can bring back some information. I think what our strategy is going to be is to find, we're assuming that NCDOT did some analysis, some traffic analysis of the new pattern when they were doing the planning for the project that's currently under construction. So what we'll do is we'll make some assumptions, plug in some trip generation from this zoning case and some other things around there, give an idea of what we think things might be in the future based on those assumptions. And we should be able to do that before that meeting. I'm thinking a little bit about the timeline to get into the agenda for that meeting, and that concerns me a little bit, but I think we'll at least have it at the table. And
June 12th is my next committee meeting.
Yeah.
At this committee.
Oh, at this committee,
Mhm.
okay,
Yeah, I think it's 2
Okay.
weeks.
yeah.
So
Not council, here.
And we'll have our engineers look at it as well and see if there's anything that they could do to help give the committee comfort or at least put it in context. So we'll look at it as well.
So Bonner, what I might suggest is you guys coordinate a little bit with the transportation people of what you have, and maybe that would give us a little greater sense of what that is on the June 12th, or at the Natural Resources meeting, as it relates to an estimated peak traffic east-west, because that seems to be the concern.
And I would also add that, we may be able to help with some, because, I didn't know that it was only a 5% reduction in the expected traffic as compared to a suburban development, which I think we all know with the Publix right there and all the restaurants and retail and opportunities to get to downtown, that would significantly amend that 5% and make it much higher. Also, the numbers, which I didn't realize, which I should have, are the maximum per individual use. So if we did max office versus max residential, and we're not talking about any of that here. We're talking about a blend, and we're talking about market conditions which predicate significantly smaller numbers anyway. And then one additional component that I forgot to mention, if the council is interested in us, adding a bike share station and facility, for example, we'd be happy to add that as a condition as well to give greater connectivity without cars.
That's always a plus. You love your bike share.
Speaking of Publix, the grocery stores are large generators of trips, and I do know from these numbers that these are 50% less than what was predicted for the grocery store at Dunn and Falls of Neuse when that rezoning came through.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure, but I'm
Urban
not going to
context.
answer for you guys on that, but you've got the built-in customers right there.
Yeah, it's an urban context.
Yeah, and the Publix is what's already under construction on it.
So just one more question for staff, and that, could you just give me a sense of whether there are high-quality active mobility connections across P Street, past this site and on up to West Street or Devereaux Meadows Greenway?
If there are those connections, or if there will be,
If staff will require them.
so the traffic signal here, once this construction's done, will have those crosswalks and those connections. And I believe that our Parks Department is doing some preliminary planning for the Devereaux Meadows Park. A part of that program, from our department's point of view, should be a greenway trail through that park, and that the natural places to cross to get into the downtown grid are either of those two signals. And there'll be some coordination of exactly how we do that. But they're both signalized intersections, and we'll have marked crosswalks and full pedestrian accommodations.
And Russ, I have had some conversation with the Parks Department as it relates to that Greenway Trail, and that's definitely, it's a flood area anyway, so that they're looking more at it as a Greenway path with some other amenities, but mainly a Greenway path.
Well, again, just the comments that I've gotten from BPAC members, and they said this is a critical crossing for them. And did I hear you say that Harrington is going to be a cycle track? I mean, that really will be the focus of bicycle trips, right to that spot on your map. And
Right.
so just, again, want to make sure that that crossing there is a high-quality crossing.
Yeah, the bike plan had originally looked at West Street as being that north-south corridor in this area. And as we started getting into some planning, the width of West Street and some of the site constraints relative to the railroads pushed us towards looking at Harrington Street, at least north of Martin and Hargett and Union Station area, recognizing that there is a West Street up here, but there is not a Harrington Street up here. That may jog back again. As that moves into implementation, I don't know I can definitively tell you it will be on Harrington Street, but that's where it seems most likely and where our implementation is pointing towards.
Okay, thanks.
So if no other discussion, if we could ask for the information on transportation that you're able to provide for us on June 12th, then the meeting is adjourned.